In 1943, a homemaker in Akron, Ohio, created a pie using simple crackers, not out of necessity alone, but out of resourcefulness, and her family enjoyed every bite. During that time, the Office of Price Administration regulated essentials like butter, meat, sugar, and canned foods, using a point system and ration stamps to manage supplies. Families had to make do with what they had and find creative ways to stretch every ingredient. This particular recipe, listed as number 18, was even featured in a Betty Crocker wartime pamphlet that reached millions of American households. Number 7 sounds like a cruel joke, but food scientists confirmed it works on a chemical level. And number 1 fooled neighbors into asking for the recipe for years after the war ended. These 25 meals were born from desperation and kept alive by pride. Hit subscribe. Here we go. Number 25, wilted lettuce salad with hot bacon dressing. When lettuce came in from the Victory Garden, limp and sun-tired, no one threw it away. Fry 2 strips of bacon. Pour the hot dripping over loose-leaf lettuce with a splash of cider vinegar and a pinch of sugar. The heat wilted the greens, the fat soaked in, the vinegar cut the richness. It looked terrible. It tasted extraordinary. Bacon fat lived in a coffee can on every American stove during the war. The government asked housewives to collect it for munitions factories where the glycerin went into explosives, so nothing was wasted, not even the drippings. Number 24, soybean meatballs. By 1943, the USDA was distributing pamphlets explaining how to stretch 1 pound of ground beef into 2 by mixing it with cooked soybeans. They mashed the beans coarsely, folded them into the meat with egg, breadcrumbs, onion, and salt. Then they rolled the mixture into balls, browned them, and simmered them in tomato sauce. The soybean had no flavor of its own, and that was the point. It absorbed everything around it, so children never knew the difference. Dried soybeans cost 8 cents a pound. Every trick that stretched the ration was a small victory at home, while the larger one was being fought overseas. Number 23, carrot fudge. Sugar was rationed starting in April 1942. Each American was allotted about half a pound per week, enough for your coffee and your conscience, but not for baking. So housewives turned to carrots, which are dense with natural sugar, to sweeten candy. They grated raw carrots, cooked them down with corn syrup and a small amount of butter until the mixture thickened and pulled away from the sides of the pot, then pressed it into a buttered pan and let it set. They dusted it with powdered sugar, if any remained, then cut it into squares. Carrot fudge had a dense, chewy texture and a sweetness that surprised anyone who did not know what was in it. Wisconsin cookbooks and Office of Defense Home Economics bulletins promoted it actively. The carrot disguised itself completely once cooked down. Children ate candy. Mothers stretched the ration. Nobody complained about vegetables that day. Number 22, oatmeal meatloaf. Every World War II era cookbook has a version of this. 1 pound of ground beef mixed with half a cup of dry rolled oats, 1 egg, a splash of milk, chopped onion, salt, and Worcestershire sauce. It was packed into a loaf pan glazed with ketchup and baked for 1 hour at 350 degree F. The oats absorbed the meat juices as it cooked, swelling and visible inside the loaf, adding bulk without adding cost. 1 pound of beef fed 6 people. The texture was firmer than plain meatloaf, holding together cleanly when sliced cold the next day for sandwiches. Oats cost about 12 cents for a 2 lb canister in 1943. They were not rationed. The government promoted oats specifically as a meat extender in pamphlets distributed through schools, churches, and rationing offices. Quaker Oats ran advertisements showing housewives exactly how to do it. Companies understood that if they helped you solve the ration problem with their products, you would buy those products for life. Most families did. Number 21. Dandelion green soup. Here is where things get wild. Victory Gardens could not always keep pace with a hungry family, and fresh vegetables were sometimes score at the market. The USDA and various state extension offices began publishing pamphlets encouraging housewives to forage their own backyards. Dandelion leaves picked young and tender before the plant fled were boiled in chicken stock with onion, a clove of garlic, and salt. Sometimes the soup was thickened with a stir of flour and butter called a roux. It was ladled into bowls with a square of cornbread. Dandelion greens are intensely bitter if picked late. Young spring leaves are almost mild, slightly nutty, and rich in iron and vitamins. Nutritionists in 1943 praised them as a free supplement to the ration diet. Housewives who learned to distinguish edible plants saved real money and fed their families vegetables the ration system could not touch. Their neighbors thought they were eccentric. Their children grew up strong. Number 20. Mock chicken legs, pattern break. This one will genuinely surprise you. No chicken, no legs. What your great-grandmother called a mock chicken leg was ground pork and V-shaped onto a wooden skewer in the silhouette of a drumstick, breaded and deep-fried until golden. V was less popular and therefore cheaper and more available than beef or chicken. Mixed with seasoned pork shaped around a stick and fried crisp, the result looked exactly like a chicken leg from a distance. Close up, it looked like ambition. These appeared on diner menus in Cincinnati, Chicago, and Pittsburgh throughout the war years. Home cooks replicated them from recipes and newspapers. They were served at church suppers as a centerpiece, a way of putting something impressive on the table when the real thing was impossible to get. What is remarkable is not the deception, but the craft. These women were not serving inferior food and calling it something else. They were creating something genuinely delicious, using different ingredients and different methods. The skewer trick was theater, the flavor was real. Number 19. Cornmeal porridge with bacon drippings, also called grits with bacon fat. The South had been eating this for a century before the war, but during rationing it spread north because cornmeal was cheap, filling, and unrationed. A pot of stone ground cornmeal cooked low and slow in water with a pinch of salt until thick enough to hold a spoon upright. It was poured into a bowl, then topped with a spoonful of the bacon drippings kept in the can on the stove with salt and black pepper over the top. In the South, this was breakfast. In the Midwest and Northeast during the war years, it became an economical dinner when ration points ran low at the end of the month. A pound of cornmeal cost about 9 and fed the family twice. It was warm, dense, and satisfying in the way that only simple starch can be when you have worked all day. Department of Agriculture home demonstration agents traveled county to county during the war, teaching exactly these kinds of dishes to women who had never cooked this way before. The government knew that feeding morale at home was part of winning the war. This appeared in Betty Crocker's 1943 Wartime Meal Planner, and it was distributed to approximately 6 million American households. Large tomatoes from the garden, hollowed out, the pulp chopped and mixed with cooked rice, a scoop of cottage cheese, salt, pepper, and whatever fresh herbs survived the Victory Garden. The mixture was stuffed back into the shells, dusted with breadcrumbs, and baked for 30 minutes until the top browned and the tomatoes softened just enough to hold its shape. Cottage cheese was not rationed. It was protein. The rice stretched the filling. The tomato was its own serving vessel. No casserole dish was needed, no extra washing up. The whole meal came together for under 15 cents, and it looked elegant on the table. Housewives who submitted this recipe to the OPA newsletter described it as the meal that made their husbands stop asking where the meat was. That was the highest compliment a wartime recipe could receive. Powdered eggs arrived in American pantries in 1943, shipped in large tins stamped with government seals. They were meant for military mesh holes, but surplus supplies were sold to civilians through rationing offices and grocery stores. The directions said to reconstitute with water 2 tablespoons of powder to 3 tablespoons of water, then cook like fresh eggs. What the directions did not say was that this would only work if you got the ratio exactly right and cooked them in enough butter over low heat. Housewives who learned the technique, and it did take practice, used them as the base for thick scrambles loaded with fried onion, diced potatoes, green pepper from the garden, and whatever greens were available. The vegetables were the point. They masked the slightly sulfurous quality of the reconstituted egg and turned what was a compromise ingredient into something genuinely worth eating. In 1944, surveys housewives who reported satisfaction with powdered eggs invariably described using them in cooked dishes with added vegetables. Plain scrambled powdered eggs were universally described with words that cannot be reprinted here. Number 16, bean and barley soup. Second pattern break. Here is the real arithmetic of wartime. A 1 eb bag of dried navy beans cost 7. A half pound of pearled barley cost 9 cents. One soup bone from the butcher, often given free with a purchase, added flavor and collagen. Onions, celery, and carrots from the Victory Garden added bulk. The total cost was approximately 22. It produced 12 to 14 servings. That was Tuesday night dinner and Wednesday lunch for a family of 4, with enough left to send a jar next door to the widow whose sons were both overseas. Housewives cooked this bean and barley soup in a heavy pot on the back of the stove, barely simmering while they did everything else. It required nothing from them for the first 2 hours. The barley swelled and thickened the broth. The beans dissolved at the edges, adding creaminess. The bone gave the whole pot a depth that cost nothing. This was not deprivation. This was competence. Number 15, war cake. No eggs, no butter, no milk. Published in countless church cookbooks and newspaper food columns starting in 1942. This is the boiled raisin ration recipe. Ingredients: 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of brown sugar, 1 and 1/2 cups of water, 2 cups of raisins, 1 teaspoon each of cinnamon, cloves, and allspice, 1 TBSP of lard or shortening, and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. You boiled the raisins with the sugar, the spices, and the lard for 3 minutes. Then you let it cool. You sifted in the flour and the baking soda. You poured it into a greased pan and baked it at 325° F for 1 hour. The result was a dense, moist, spiced cake, almost gingerbread-like, that kept for a week without drying out. No eggs because eggs were precious. No butter because butter was rationed. No milk because milk was needed for children first. It tasted like something your grandmother would bake for the holidays because it did become a holiday tradition. Many families who made war cake during the rationing years continued making it after the war ended because they loved it. Their grandchildren still make it today, often with no idea of its origins. Number 14, creamed chipped beef on toast. The soldiers had a different name for this. We will not be using that name here. Thin slices of dried salted beef were sold in small glass jars, chopped rough, and folded into a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. The mixture was poured over toast. It was served for breakfast, for lunch, or for a budget emergency dinner. Dried beef was cheaper than fresh. It was preserved. It stretched. The white sauce, technically a bechamel, was warm and filling, and it disguised the saltiness of the beef behind the richness of dairy. A jar of dried beef cost about 30 cents and fed 4 people when turned into cream sauce. Home economists at the USDA wrote detailed instructions on making white sauce from memory. They insisted that once a housewife could make white sauce without measuring, she could feed her family through anything. They were right. The women who mastered white sauce could stretch any protein, any vegetable, any leftover into a complete meal. It was the fundamental skill of the wartime kitchen. Number 13, meatless Monday vegetable pot pie. The government asked for meatless Tuesdays and Fridays in many regions. Some communities observed both, which meant housewives needed 2 complete, satisfying dinners per week that contained no rationed protein. The solution most commonly recorded in household surveys was the vegetable pot pie. Diced potatoes, carrots, peas, and onions were cooked in a thick vegetable stock, thickened with flour and seasoned with celery, salt, and pepper. The filling was poured into a deep dish and topped with a single crust made from half butter and half lard to stretch the butter ration, baked until the crust was golden and the filling was bubbling through the fork holes pressed in the top. What made this work was the crust. A good pie crust made even vegetables feel indulgent. Children who would have objected to a bowl of carrots and potatoes ate the same vegetables willingly when wrapped in pastry. Mothers understood this completely. The crust was not a luxury. It was a psychological tool. Number 12, liver dumplings and broth. Organ meats were not rationed. This was deliberate government policy. Red points, the currency for buying beef, pork, and lamb, did not apply to liver, kidney, heart, or tongue. The OPA calculated that if housewives could be persuaded to use organ meats regularly, the strain on the ration supply would ease. Liver dumplings were the Midwestern solution. Beef or pork liver ground fine was mixed with breadcrumbs soaked in milk, a beaten egg, minced onion, salt, marjoram, and a pinch of nutmeg. The mixture was shaped into small balls and simmered in beef broth for 15 minutes. They floated to the surface when done, pale and tender, rich with iron and flavor. Served in the broth with a slice of dark rye bread, the marjoram was essential. It softened the metallic edge of the liver into something almost sweet. German-American communities in Milwaukee, Cincinnati, and St. Louis had been making liver dumplings for generations before the war. Their neighbors learned quickly a pound of liver cost 11. The dumplings fed 6. Third pattern break. This is the one that defines the Roy. This recipe appeared on the back of the Ritz cracker box starting in 1934 and became one of the most prepared desserts in America during the war years. It used no apples. It contained no fruit at all. 36 Ritz crackers broken in half and scattered into an unbaked pie crust. A syrup made from 2 cups water, 2 cups sugar, 2 teaspoons cream of tartar brought to a boil and poured over the crackers, dots of butter scattered on top, a heavy pinch of cinnamon, the top crust laid over and crimped, baked at 425 degrees for 30 minutes. The cream of tartar reacted with the butter and sugar to create an acidic, fruity quality. The crackers softened in the syrup and took on the texture of cooked apple slices. The cinnamon completed the illusion. Tasters who did not know what they were eating consistently identified it as apple pie in blind tests conducted by extension offices in 1943. Some described it as better than apple pie. Some of those testers were professional home economists. Nabisco sold Ritz crackers in extraordinary quantities during the war years. They did not advertise the mock pie recipe as a wartime substitute. They advertised it as a clever discovery. The genius was in the framing, not making do, making something. In Hungarian, Polish, and Eastern European communities across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and the Great Lakes region, stuffed cabbage had always been made with a generous filling of ground beef and rice. During rationing, the ratio flipped. 2 cups of cooked rice to 1 cup of ground beef, stretched further with grated carrot and finely chopped onion, and bound with egg and tomato paste, wrapped in softened cabbage leaves, packed tight in a Dutch oven, covered with tomato sauce, seasoned with brown sugar and cider vinegar, and cooked low and slow for 2 hours. Families who had been making this dish for generations barely noticed the shift. 1 pound of beef split among 12 rolls fed the whole table. George Washington Carver had been writing about cooking with peanuts since the 19s. The USDA cited his work regularly during the war as justification for promoting peanut products as protein substitutes. A tablespoon of butter is melted with diced onion and celery. A roux is stirred in. Then chicken stock is added gradually with 1/4 cup of smooth peanut butter whisked until dissolved. The soup is seasoned with salt, cayenne, and lemon. It is thick, warm, and nutty with a heat that lingers. The Virginia peanut farming community had been making this soup for decades. During the war, it spread to food columns across the country. Peanut butter was not rationed. It cost 23 cents for an 18-0 jar. It was a source of protein. It filled people up. Number 8, vinegar pie pattern break. This is the one that makes people stop and reread the recipe. No fruit, no chocolate, no cream. 1 cup sugar, 3 tablespoons flour, 2 teaspoons apple cider vinegar, 1 cup water, 2 TBSPs butter, and a pinch of nutmeg. Cooked until thickened. Poured into a baked shell and chilled until set. A frontier recipe from the Civil War era, revived because it needed